Now stop what you're doing because I'm about to ruin the image and the style that you're used to. My name is Humpty. I like my oatmeal lumpy.
Oh my God, that's an oldie but goodie.
Give me, baby. Do the Humpty.
Do the Humpty Hump. Do the Humpty Hump.
Give me, baby. Do the
Do
Humpty.
the Humpty Hump. Do the Humpty Hump.
I once got busy in a Burger King bathroom. Welcome to the Sabby and Jaybe show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. So good to see all of you here on this Thursday, late afternoon, early evening, depending on where you are in the world. The Sabby and Jaybe show is every Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also see my co-host, Sabby Sabs. Are you doing the show tonight? I'm trying to remember if you are.
No, I took this evening off because we were going to do the panel.
Yeah.
So I didn't, no.
Okay.
I didn't want to confuse people.
All right, cool. So Sabby's going to be getting some well-needed rest. And so, yes, you can see her tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. And then you can see me back here on RBN on Sunday at 1 p.m. for the Jaybe show. And you can typically find me on my channel on Tuesdays at 2. Now, if you guys have not already, go ahead and do us a favor and go ahead and give this video a like. This helps us out deeply, and we thank you very much. If you want to wait till a little bit later, that's okay too. But if you want to, just make sure that you click whatever tickles your fancy. Also, if you would like to, you guys can also subscribe to our Substack at revolutionaryblackout.substack.com. Sorry, I'm getting my channels mixed up, but you guys have that there. That gives you email notifications whenever we go live or upload clips. And anybody who has any type of inquiries or want to submit stories or have any questions, you guys can go to revolutionaryblackout@outlook.com. So thank you so very much. Hello to everybody that's joining. We will get to everybody in the chat a little bit later, but good to see you. Nice to have you in here. But we're going to talk about a couple of things. So more or less a couple of people. So what do we have talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about leaders against the people. We have Kenyan President William Ruto and presumptive Democratic nominee Kamala Harris. And we would like to introduce activist and author Dwayne Omowale coming in to join us. Good to have you with us, Dwayne.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You know, I'm trying to appeal to that inner African in me to make sure I pronounce it correctly. So
yeah, that's important, you know, because of historical circumstances. We're stuck with these colonizers' languages. So part of the decolonial process is reconnecting to our, languages and pronunciations.
Yeah, I know Sabby's going to roll her eyes when I say this, but I actually did a DNA test and I found out that I'm a third Nigerian. So, yeah. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and you are pretty astute when it comes to your knowledge of anti-imperialism and the ongoings in Africa. And one of the things that I actually wanted to ask you about was regarding what's going on in Kenya. So I want to play this video really quickly for you. That's kind of short, but I think it's pretty indicative of what's going on with the people who are rising up against, don't you do that, against William Ruto. So let me share my screen really quick, and then I want to get your reaction to this as soon as possible. So shout out to the Communist Party of Kenya. They actually showed this video, and here's some young Kenyans, and it says, "Tomorrow the general strike is on. With all our might, let's stand against the sworn enemy of the Kenyan people, William Ruto and his billionaire class. This ruling class continues to auction our country, can only suffer defeat." So let's get into this. This was so interesting. All right.
I want to assure all the Kenyans that we have not gathered here today in vain. Viva comrades, viva. We assure Kenyans that we will not see those madmen on the streets. We have gotten to the point in this country where we even have Caucasians wielding arms on the streets. Tutakubali, tutakataa.
The time has come for us to complete the mission we began with our protest. William Ruto and his regime, along with their local collaborators and international financiers, have shown their true colors. They promise reforms but deliver nothing of substance. Let us be clear, Ruto will not change unless we force him to.
True.
This illegitimate government, backed from fraud, tribal mobilization, and the dirty money of global organized crimes, cannot be allowed to stand.
Yes. Any property destruction should be paid for by the president and the members of parliament who voted yes to the finances. They had a real opportunity to reject his oppressive bill, but they squandered it until the Kenyan masses forced their land. We shall not bear the consequences of their greed and incompetence.
People like Kindiki and Diwale and other defenders of the status quo who appeared on TV to try and play cheap politics with our lives, drive believable lies that the protests were an act of malice by those who did not want Ruto as president. Let them continue inciting more public anger. The youth want jobs, food, housing, healthcare, decent housing, basic life necessities, to live a life of dignity and not silly rants.
Narudi bado hapa nikiwaambia kesho ndio kesho, si ndio? Kesho ni nane kabla ya saa nane. Na hii ifikie yule mama mboga pale mtaani. Ile wakati tulikuwa tunaambiwa kujeni tuwapatie shilingi moja, tunaenda tunatulia. Na handshake haitatutuliza. Tumeamua chenye tumeanza tunaenda kumaliza. Na kama
So, your thoughts on what was said by these young Kenyans?
I think what they've been saying and the things that I've been seeing coming out of Kenya, to me, are actually very encouraging, and it's very reflective of the type of mood that we've been seeing across the African continent within recent years. You know, this mood of the African masses are really frustrated with the type of corrupt leadership that's that they have across the continent. So, you know, Kenya is one of the more recent examples of the fact that the African masses are rising up against these regimes. And, you know, particularly what I find very encouraging about Kenya was that through the mass mobilization of the Kenyan people, they were actually able to get the government to reverse its position on that bill that the government was trying to pass, that bill to increase taxes on the Kenyan people. So it's very powerful to see that this mobilization actually resulted in not only the type of results that the masses wanted to see, but the fact that the masses weren't palisaded by what the government did, that the masses have continued to put pressure on the regime. Ultimately, what they want is William Ruto to step down. They want him out of power. And I fully agree with what they're saying, because one of the issues with his response to the protest is that he sent the security forces out to brutalize Kenyan protesters. There have been reports of Kenyans not only being killed by the security forces, but even reports of people who've been abducted by the security forces as well. The security forces are actually engaged in kidnapping protesters. So to me, anytime a leader of a nation has to resort to those type of tactics to suppress the will and the voices of the people, at that point, you're not a legitimate leader of the people. At that point, I think you need to step down. You need to leave. Togo is a West African nation. I've been for several years. I've been involved in the Formasco movement in Togo, and when you speak to a lot of the activists there, it's a similar type of thought process where for many years the regime in Togo has typically tried to repress the voices of the masses by using the security forces to suppress these people, to use violent means to suppress the will of the people. So the mood in Togo, and this is why it's known as the Formasco movement, the mood is that really they're not looking for reforms anymore from the government. What they really want is that the president for Nsembe needs to step down, that in the eyes of the Togolese people, he's no longer legitimate as the president. And I see the similar type of thing taking place in Kenya, where in the eyes of a large number of the Kenyan people, William Ruto is no longer a legitimate president, not only in terms of what he wanted to do in terms of raising taxes and placing that burden on the Kenyan people, but he's no longer legitimate in the sense that he really has demonstrated that he does not care about the will of the Kenyan people or the concerns of the Kenyan people by responding to the protest in the manner that he has responded. And I think another important thing to point out as well, and again, not just talking about Kenya, but within the wider understanding of what we see taking place in Africa, is that, as the video pointed out, William Ruto is, by Kenyan standards, a billionaire. Many of the people who are in this government are billionaires. So the type of issue that we see taking place in these countries is, why is it whenever governments want to pass austerity measures, what they do is place the burden on the ordinary people, citizens who are already struggling, citizens who are really trying to survive, and that's where the burden is being placed. The taxes are increased on these citizens who are already poor, who are already struggling, and this burden is being placed on these citizens by a political leadership that's wealthy. As I said, by Kenya standards, Ruto and many of those in this government are billionaires. And a Pan-African leader whom I admire very greatly is Thomas Sankara. And one of the aspects of Sankara's policies that I was mentioned is that when Sankara took power in Burkina Faso, he did the opposite. What he did to really address the financial issues in the country was to actually start slashing things from the top down. So he reduced the salaries for government ministers, reduced government spending. One of the policies he implemented in doing that is, those who were in the government when Thomas Sankara was in power could no longer drive the most expensive cars, could no longer fly first class. He really cut down on government spending. So I think that's something important to keep in mind as well with the situation in Kenya, that this is essentially a situation where we have a billionaire ruling class trying to put a financial burden on the Kenyan people as opposed to making sacrifices themselves. And I mean, because obviously when you're a billionaire, you're in a better position to make those financial sacrifices than somebody who's struggling to survive. So that's an aspect of the frustration as well, that the people in Kenya and throughout the continent are just really frustrated by constantly being forced to make these sacrifices and constantly having these burdens placed upon them by politicians who frankly will never have to deal with these burdens, by politicians who don't have to deal with the day-to-day issues that the Kenyan people and that the African people are dealing with on a regular basis.
Yeah, one of the things that I also wanted to share this as well, and then I also have a question regarding the future of Kenya. If you can give us that opinion from 6,000 feet, but I want to share this as well.
Before you share that, Jaybe, can I just ask him something about the burden really quick?
Sure.
That he mentioned, because this is interesting, because Professor Richard Wolff recently uploaded a video about taxpayer burden here in the United States, but I'm hearing similarities with Kenya. And one of the things that Professor Richard Wolff said, he was complaining about how billionaires are not paying their fair share of taxes, but it is our government that makes it that way. Our government gives them all these different tax breaks. They have different loopholes, and we, the working class, we bear that burden. And so when I see people in Kenya saying we are starting a general strike, this is something that those of us at RBN have been talking about since the very first year that we started, like the need for a general strike. And I've seen South Korea have a one-day general strike. I've seen other countries do this, and it's really exciting when I see that happen. And I'm just always wondering, like, how can we actually get the people here in the U.S. to wake up and realize that the only way the government is really going to meet your demands is if you shut things down.
Yes, for many reasons, it's more difficult to organize something like that in the U.S. I mean, in the first place, when we talk about billionaires in the U.S., it's not the president of the United States isn't a billionaire, as in the situation with Kenya. So there's that disconnect between the people who are actually the political class and the billionaire class, and very often it's the case where people, most people in America, I don't really think have a full understanding or full sense of what actually shapes American policies. I think a lot of people still have this conception of you go to the polls every so often, you vote, and you elect people, and there's really no deeper understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, of who's really influencing the politics. Whereas in countries like Kenya, there isn't that disconnect between the business class and the political elite. Very often, what you find in African politics, and actually when I took an African politics course in college, the professor, he told me that the difference between American politics and African politics is that typically in American politics, people who have money go into politics, whereas in African politics, people go into politics to make money. So it's more apparent to the people what's the opportunism that's taking place within the politics, where I think in the American political system, it's disguised in a more effective way because people really don't see the opportunism in its true, in the raw form in the way that you see in many African nations. And on top of that, the other issue as well is, on paper, the United States is a more stable democracy. So, for example, when protests take place, the government, typically wouldn't send the army to actually shoot and kill protesters and to kidnap protesters and engage in that sort of thing. So, because the United States tends to be more open and more democratic on the surface, I think that also helps to hide the type of opportunism that we really see taking place behind the scenes in the politics.
So yeah, I want to share this really quick. This actually solidifies what you were saying earlier about William Ruto and sending people after the protesters.
It's still hot. It has just been shot, and people are merely just standing by. They're not even protesting, and they're shooting live bullets. This is wrong. This is unacceptable. We can't allow this to happen in a country like Kenya. Hatutakubali. Everyone had already, informed the public that there will be a peaceful protest. But as you can see, police are not allowing the peaceful protest to happen. Actually, this bullet cartridge is still hot. They've been shooting live bullets ourselves with our own eyes, as you can.
So of course I can't necessarily play the noise of the firing, but because we're on YouTube, but basically, it's basically giving validity to what you just said about what William Ruto is doing. And William Ruto, to be honest with you, he sounds exactly like the West and how they deal with dissent within our country. Because look at what happened with the protesters who are protesting for Palestine. They were taken down by we literally live in a police state. So it feels like it's like the vassal states also copy the state that they're under and how they deal with the people. So ultimately, it really just, it's, you can see how it's monkey see, monkey do when it comes to vassal states like Rwanda, and like Kenya, and how they are dealing with the dissent and and wanting something better than what the IMF and the World Bank basically dangle over their heads.
That's true. That's exactly what it is. One of the clearest examples I can give to show just how accurate that point is the fact that when you actually study African history, the vast majority of traditional African societies actually did not have a standing security force, did not have standing armies, a standing police force. So the argument I always make is that when you see the security forces in these African nations actually, going out and engaging in a violent repression of the protesters, that's exactly what those security forces were established to do. That during the colonial period, it became necessary to actually have a standing police force, a standing colonial army to suppress the African masses whenever the African masses rise up. And essentially what happened in Africa in the post-colonial period is that many of these African states inherited the same colonial apparatus, and there was no attempt made to reform or to radically alter the apparatus. So essentially African states today function in the same way that the colonial states function in. And again, to go back to the example I mentioned with Togo being a very brutal military dictatorship, when I interviewed one of the activists that I've been working very closely with on the Togolese situation, she informed me that her father, who was also an activist as well, who'd been arrested on many occasions and actually had been tortured by the Togolese security forces, one of the things that the security forces told him was that the torture methods that they used in Togo were methods that they actually learned from the French. So we see all throughout Africa that the security forces actually engaged in the very practices that they learned from the colonial masters. So it very much is a situation where the colonial system in Africa is still in place, and that's why these regimes operate in the way that they operate. They're models and reflections of the prior colonial system. And as I mentioned before, the difference is the United States is it's more effective at masking what it is that they do. So even though it is a police state, most American citizens really don't get the sense of it being so, because the type of aggression that we really see is not as open and it's not as raw as situations in Kenya. So, for example, what we see with the Palestinian protesters, that would be a situation where the police force would actually come in and try to shut down the protesters and and repress their voices in that way. But typically in the United States, that tends to be a last resort, whereas in many African countries, the very first thing that they do to deal with the protesters is to actually send out those forces and to really engage in not only repressive violence but very violent repressive violence as well. So typically in the United States, the first reaction of the security forces would not be to open and shoot live ammunition at the protesters.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, it seems like to me the protesters in Kenya seem to be less afraid than protesters we have here in the U.S. And don't get me wrong, the Palestinian protest, that was a phenomenal thing, and there's still protests that are happening. But just in general, I have noticed across the world, it does seem like protesters in other countries are less afraid of the police, especially like even if we look at a country like France, you mentioned France, like they just hit the street like whenever and just like, screw all this. We're going out. We don't care what Macron says. We're going to go back and push back against the police. But I wonder why that is. Like, why is it that protesters in Kenya seem to be not as afraid as protesters in the US?
I don't know if I would say it's so much a fair thing. I think it's results because, for example, a few years ago when we saw the protesting in Ferguson or protesting in Baltimore, I wouldn't say that those protesters were necessarily afraid of the police. They went out there and were actually, or even more recently with the George Floyd situation, I wouldn't say those protesters are afraid. But I think from my observation, what the difference is, and I mentioned in Kenya, the protesters were actually able to get some policy results that the government had planned to raise taxes and they didn't do so. In the United States, typically what happens, and again, going back to the type of sophisticated nature of the exploitative system that the United States has, that people could actually go out and protest, and the protests could even be very destructive, lighting buildings on fire, lighting cars on fire, that sort of thing. And what we find in the United States is that typically we wait until the anger dies down and nothing of substance really changes. So it creates a situation where after a while, I think people just get fatigued with the protesting because there's only so many times you can get so angry that you go out in the streets and protest and engage in that sort of thing and then not see results. So I think essentially from my observation, I think that's the difference. But particularly, as I said, what we're seeing in Kenya is not just unique to Kenya. When you look at African politics over the last several years, there have been numerous examples of people taking to the streets and protesting and doing that. And there actually have been situations where people in Africa have toppled governments through these protests. For example, in Burkina Faso, I mentioned Burkina Faso in the context of Thomas Sankara, but the man who assassinated Sankara and took power, Blaise Compaoré, he was actually toppled in 2014 by a mass demonstration of the people in Burkina Faso. So throughout Africa, we do see examples where these protests lead to actual tangible changes. And from my observation in the United States, I think people after a while just become fatigued because when the protest doesn't work, then what's the next step? Mass mobilization is not bringing about the type of changes that we want to see. So it just creates that, like I said, I think it creates a sense of fatigue and a sense of, I wouldn't say hopelessness necessarily, but just it makes you feel like you're not really fully in charge of your situation, and that it makes you feel like it's very difficult to actually bring about the type of changes that we want to see in the United States because of that.
Yeah, it feels like in places like Kenya that there's less of an apparatus to suppress the people. Like they want to have a bigger apparatus to suppress the people, but they just don't have it. And so it allows the people to go, hey, they're not as they don't have as much strength as as the United States, so we can actually rise up. And I think, and I don't want to sound paternalistic in this assumption, but it also feels like we're so conditioned here because, like Nick of RBN always says, the United States is the most propagandized country in the world, which in my brain says that Kenyans are less propagandized than we are. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever heard the elephant and the lawn chair analogy. So it's basically, well, if you take a baby elephant and you tie him to a stake in the ground, right? That baby elephant cannot move anywhere outside of the vicinity of that stake as long as that chain is around its leg. And so if it, and it grows up thinking it can never move away from that because it's been trained that way. But then once it's an adult, you can take that chain and instead of it being attached to a stake in the ground, it's attached just to a loose plastic lawn chair. But that elephant will not move because it has been conditioned that, oh, we can't move outside of this ring. And it feels like the United States, we are like that elephant versus people in places like Kenya, Burkina Faso, Niger, and many other different countries. Hell, you could even say places like France, right? And Sri Lanka. They do not have that mentality. So do you feel that it is similar in that way because the West were more propagandized in that way?
That's a big part of what it is. And one of the arguments that I've made before, particularly looking at it from a historical perspective, one of the things that is fascinating to me is the level of mobilization and organization we saw in the 1960s, particularly with the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power movements. And for many years, I really thought about why is it doesn't seem like we have that level of an actual active anti-imperialist movement now. And then it finally occurred to me that in this day and age, you can't turn on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or one of these platforms and see a Malcolm X and see a Huey Newton or a Stokely Carmichael or H. Rap Brown. Those voices are completely removed from the mainstream media. So, for example, the clip we played before, that's the Communist Party in Kenya doing a press conference that had national attention. No Communist Party anywhere in the United States is going to do a press conference, and you could turn on mainstream media and see it. So, a big part of it, a lot of those voices are there. They've just become very, essentially there's a media blackout on those radical voices. So even though those movements and those spaces and those voices exist in American political discourse, where the mainstream media is concerned and as a reflection of the fact that the mainstream media does not cover these things, I think the general American population really just, they're not aware that these people, these organizations, these voices exist out there. So what we tend to find as a result of that, and again, going back to what I mentioned with prior protest, what you'll find is every so often people become very frustrated and they'll take to the streets and protest, but there's no organization behind it. There's no ideology behind it. It's just a bunch of people who are frustrated and taking to the streets to vent their frustration. But because you don't have an actual coordinated movement behind it, because the masses of people who want change, even if they want change, they don't necessarily know what to do about creating that change. They don't necessarily know who to connect to create that change. It creates it really fractures the movement in a sense, because as I said, now you have a situation where people are frustrated and they want that change, but they don't know where to go to find the voices who are really able to articulate what it is that needs to be done to go about creating that change. And typically the voices that do get elevated as agents of change really are not engaged in that at all. And a most recent example is the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw how very quickly that was able to get co-opted because the media is in a position where even if a movement starts out as a genuine grassroots movement, the American media is so effective at putting out people at the forefront of those movements, and now people who weren't necessarily originally leaders of that movement become the face and leaders of movements that they had nothing to do with, because originally it was a grassroots movement. And when you put somebody who was not part of that movement initially at the face of it, at the head of the movement, you see what we saw what happened with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter have just completely been co-opted to the point where it's not really a serious movement for change at all anymore. So it's just an empty slogan. I've been in communities that are very clearly gentrified, where you'll see Black Lives Matter signs in the gentrified communities. That's what Black Lives Matter has been reduced to. But the thing is, that's not what it was originally. As I said, originally it was meant to be a grassroots movement really fighting for change. So I think propaganda is a big part of it, because the media really gets to control the narrative. And part of it, as I said, part of controlling the narrative is certain voices just never get that space in the mainstream media, so you never hear about them, so the public isn't aware of them. But the other part of it is any effort to really build a genuine grassroots movement, if it becomes large enough, the media then has an ability to co-opt it and to push it in a different direction.
Yeah, I will say, I think, none of us were alive back then, but we've played a number of those videos on RBN. But sometimes I think people forget that Malcolm X and MLK were given corporate microphones. They were allowed to, go into corporate news channels, talk shows. There's a number of videos with Malcolm X on talk shows back in the day, those old black and white videos. But they were given a microphone, and I think corporate media and the establishment learned the lesson from that. And so now those voices are not given a microphone. And this is why I always tell people, like, if you see someone given that opportunity multiple times on corporate media, like BLM did after the co-option, that right there should be a big red flag to you that there has been some co-opting going on there. I think it's important for people to recognize that, like, you have to get your voice out. And unfortunately, mainstream corporate media, they are controlling the narrative because they're the ones that have such a large reach to the masses. So we don't have that anymore. There was a sort of a sense of some type of return towards that during the 1990s. This was after the Malcolm X biopic was released, which starred Denzel Washington. There was more of a push to go back towards that type of, activism or rhetoric. I don't know if you remember this, Jaybe. Do you remember the Malcolm X hats and T-shirts? And then that became like a thing. Do you remember that?
It made its way into Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, actually.
Yeah. And then but again, I think that was because the movie.
Yeah. But the 90s, I think that's fascinating because what we have in the early 90s, I think it's still the remnants of the 1960s movement. So you not only the Malcolm X movie making Malcolm X popular, but you have hip hop. Hip hop at the time was still very much revolutionary. You still had a lot of those type of revolutionary, nationalistic, Afrocentric messages in the music. Especially artists actually sampling Malcolm X, so you could actually hear Malcolm X speak on these samples. So I think in the 90s there's still, and also Louis Farrakhan doing the Million Man March. I think in the 90s you had those type of black nationalist, Afrocentric, those type of voices. They still had a level of mainstream access. But again, what happened was we see hip hop being co-opted, and even in this day and age, Farrakhan, when he did the Million Man March, that was something that had a lot of media attention, a lot of coverage. The subsequent anniversary marches certainly did not have the same level of media attention. So again, even in the 90s, it was a similar situation where there was still a level of media access for certain voices that we don't find now. And even not just from a mainstream perspective, mainstream media perspective, and entertainment perspective. As I said, hip hop at the time still had those revolutionary messages that was out in the mainstream. But the other thing that was happening in the early 90s was why I mentioned Afrocentrism. Afrocentrism was also really developing as an academic movement, and it was a movement that really became part of the mainstream academic discourse. So that's why you have certain scholars actually going on the offensive and attacking Afrocentricity, such as Mary Lefkowitz, who had a book Not Out of Africa. Even recently I had a conversation with some people about this. We tend to forget scholars like Henry Louis Gates and Colonel West. Part of them becoming mainstream recognized scholars was that they were on the forefront of attacking Afrocentric scholarship when Afrocentric scholarship was becoming popular and mainstream. So even in the early 90s, we see essentially a counter movement against these voices, a counter movement against hip hop, a counter movement against the remnants of the Black Power movement, and a counter movement against Afrocentricity's popularity. But that's a good point. I think the 90s was really the last period where these type of ideas were still in the forefront of the mainstream. And certainly now you can't turn on the radio and hear anything as revolutionary as the type of music you would have heard in the 90s with certain groups like Public Enemy or X-Plan.
You can't even hear Sister Soldier anymore. And she is still around. She does write. I Googled her the other day because I was curious to see what she was up to. But she's still writing books and all that jazz. But I think we all remember, and Jaybe, we've played it on the show multiple times, on RBN multiple times, the conversation between her and Dr. Cornel West on the Phil Donahue show. Like, you would never see that today.
Larry King as well.
Yeah, you would never see, like, we were it was, I think, a little bit easier for us to be a little bit radicalized growing up.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me when you talk about the Afrocentric. I remember Colonel Taylor's son in A Different World was also about that Afrocentrism. Is he had a dashiki and a hat and everything. It was I'm showing my age, but it went into the mainstream too. And I remember that part in that episode in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air when a friend of Aunt Viv and Uncle Phil's came, and he was part of the radical movements that happened, and they had their own African names as well. I think Uncle Phil was Olafame, right? And hers was Anabola, and it was just like, it's like that was considered cool to be back in the day, and now if you try to reflect that now, it's like, well, you just need to just vote, just sit down and be quiet.
But that's part of the co-option that I mentioned, that even movements that start out, trying to force or advocate for a particular type of change, it always comes back to just go out and vote. 2020 protest was a great example. The whole protest around George Floyd. Democrats seized on that very quickly and made it a go out and vote type of situation.
Yeah. One of the things I want to before we get into Kamala Harris, because I definitely want to talk about that, but I want to, while still kind of sort of in the Kenyan subject, I want to switch gears a little bit to what's going on in Haiti. So there is as they call it, a gang leader. Name is Jimmy Cherizel. His nickname is Barbecue. I talked about him with Kim Ives a couple weeks back. But a lot of people are now trying to, people like William Ruto is literally sending service members, military members of the Kenyan army to subdue what people like Jimmy Cherizel and a lot of the more revolutionary groups in Haiti is doing. I just want to play this. This is from Dan Cohen. Actually, let me read this really quick just to set it up. Dan Cohen says the U.S. government and its media apparatus are telling you Haiti has a gang problem that demands foreign military intervention. It is true there's a problem with criminal gangs that kidnap, terrorize, and murder innocent people. What they don't tell you is that these criminal gangs are creations of the system, supported by the U.S.-backed oligarchs. They also don't tell you that the invasion is targeted against the only figure that fighting against those criminal gangs, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizel, leader of the G9 Anti-Crime Federation. Watch him speak to a huge crowd of supporters about how the ruling class exploits the poor masses. Unlike Cherizel, U.S. puppet Ariel Henry is reviled by the people. He can't appear in public, let alone draw a crowd of hundreds of thousands like Cherizel. This is enemy number one of the U.S. empire in Haiti. Anti-imperialists must resist war propaganda promoted through mass media and defend him and Haitian sovereignty. Let's take a listen to Jimmy right here.
Pour ces petits pas qui grand entrepreneur, nous même nous pas chambre quand même. Il y a toujours besoin nous pour sortir pour la rouler caoutchouc pour. Il y a besoin nous pour la faire manifestation casser briser pour. C'est révolution mentale ça. Avant nous de cette révolution ensemble qui est force révolutionnaire. Chez n'a pas comme il y a des moyens pour faire qui vient faire que nous faire nous passer pour bandit. L'élève pour nous faire différence entre gang bandit à monde qui fait révolution.
So one of my biggest mistakes I made was that I should have put Ariel Henry on the thumbnail, but of course I didn't want to make it too busy. But Ariel Henry is also one of those people that also is against the people. And as you can see there, Jimmy Cherizel is basically saying that they want to oust their leader too. So if you can just give me your thoughts about what Jimmy Cherizel is doing and your thoughts on what's going on in Haiti.
Well, I want to start with it's I always found it rather ironic that the Kenyan security forces are going to Haiti to protect the Haitian citizens at a time that the same Kenyan security forces are also brutalizing the Kenyan citizens. So it's one of those ironic things that government of Kenya apparently is doing more to protect Haitian citizens than its own citizens. But I think the situation in Haiti, and again, we're speaking about propaganda. I think this is where U.S. propaganda becomes very important with Haiti. That these issues in Haiti didn't start recently. These issues go back to the very foundation of Haiti during the independence movement, where the United States not only was unwilling to recognize Haiti's independence, but actually placed an embargo on Haiti. And this is in 1804. So since that time, it's a very long period of history. Since that time, the United States has consistently tried to do things to undermine Haiti, to essentially keep Haiti destabilized, because Haiti was a great source of panic for slave masters in the United States. They obviously did not want Haiti to be an example for the enslaved Africans here in the States, and not just the United States. The Western colonial powers are very much afraid of Haiti. So throughout the Americas, there was a real concern that enslaved Africans could repeat what happened in Haiti, and that's to have a massive revolution to gain the independence of, or a massive revolution to free themselves from slavery in the way that Haiti did when Haiti gained its independence. So it's really important to understand that historical background to what's happening now in Haiti, that Haiti's political instability has been very deliberate, that the United States has continuously intervened in Haiti. And one of the things that they've done is they've essentially created the same political ruling elite that Jaybe is fighting in Haiti. That's the political elite that was propped up and put in power by the United States, because there was a period of time, and again, I don't know how many people are really aware of this history, but there was actually a period of time where the United States invaded Haiti and imposed a military occupation of Haiti. And when the United States left, they essentially ensured that the leadership in Haiti would be a leadership that's beholden to American interests. So one of the things that they did in the 1950s was to prop up the Duvalier dictatorship, the very brutal father-son dictatorship that propped up by American imperialism. And since that time, every regime that Haiti's had essentially was a regime that was backed up by American imperialism, with perhaps the exception of Aristide's government, but Aristide was subsequently overthrown by the United States. So really, when we look at the situation in Haiti, that's what Jaybe is really fighting against. It's not so much just a very corrupt political ruling elite, but also it's an understanding that this ruling elite is backed by certain imperialistic powers that have their own interest in Haiti. So really what he's fighting for, and what the people of Haiti are fighting for, is actually a real sovereignty, to finally give Haiti the ability to decide its own destiny, because for so many years the feeling among Haitian people is that they've never been free to decide their destiny, because whether it's the United States, France, Britain, or one of these colonial powers, they've constantly intervened in Haiti to undermine Haiti's stability and to undermine Haiti's politics, and to put Haiti in a situation where Haiti, as I said, can't decide its own destiny. And I think, again, going back to the Kenyan intervention, I mean, not only is it an issue because, as I pointed out, Ruto is sending the Kenyan security force to defend Haiti at the time that the security force is brutalizing Kenyans. But again, it just reinforces this feeling of Haiti not being free to decide its own destiny. I mean, it creates the perception that anytime there's political turmoil in Haiti, these imperialist countries have to either get involved directly or send Kenya or whoever it is as a proxy to intervene in Haiti's politics. So it's always a situation where outsiders are coming into Haiti to try to shape Haiti's politics and shape the direction that Haiti is heading in. But I think it's important to really understand the historical context and the historical background of what's happening in Haiti. And as I said, this is not, even though when you see media coverage, it might give you the perception that this destabilization in Haiti and these issues are recent, but no, these are issues that have been going on for decades and decades in Haiti.
Thank you very much for that, because a lot of times, you're going to hear people, especially a lot of the Western media, is going to try to demonize and say, well, the United States needs to go into Haiti because all these gangs, they're tearing Haiti apart, and it's going to be backed by United States, Canada, and France, and they're going to continue to basically, put in a puppet over the people. And people need to realize that the Haitian people need their own sovereignty and self-determination, just like the people of Kenya need. And to be honest with you, if they're asking for people like William Ruto in Kenya to be ousted and Ariel Henry and Haiti to be ousted, then really It should be the will of the people above anything else. And the United States and the West really need to keep their diseased little grubby hands out of these countries. So, while that's being said, I want to turn attention to this country. Oh boy. So, I'm going to share what happened. And people who are in the chat, make sure to take that poll because I am curious as to what you think. So Kamala Harris was in Michigan the other day. And this happened. I want to get your thoughts on the other side.
He intends to surrender our fight against the climate crisis.
Now, in the background, if you listen closely, there are people that are chanting ceasefire now, and they want to end what's going on in Palestine. So just let you guys know, that's what's being said in the background.
And he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking.
Your thoughts?
I think Democrats have to be really happy that Donald Trump keeps running for president, because one of the things that it allows them to do to deflect away from any type of criticisms about their policies or lack thereof is to use Donald Trump. You know, if you criticize me, that must mean you want Donald Trump elected. Is essentially the argument that not only Harris is making, but we've heard that argument since Hillary Clinton was running for president. And I think in this particular context, I find it very callous because, you know, the typical argument as it relates to foreign policy with what's happening with Israel and Palestine is, you know, you might have your criticisms of the Democratic Party, but Donald Trump is going to be worse. So, you know, go to the polls and elect the Democrats. But the issue I have with that is, if you're somebody who has lost a loved one in Palestine, or you have, you know, family members who are suffering in Palestine, it's not much comfort to you that Donald Trump is going to be worse on this issue than the Democrats are. There's already a genocide taking place. So to make the argument that, yeah, there's a genocide, but a genocide could get worse, that's not the type of argument that I think, you know, voters who are concerned about this issue really want to hear. So, you know, to me, it's very indicative of the type of election cycle that I've been expecting as it relates to this issue, that what we'll get from the Democrats is to essentially deflect away from very legitimate concerns and criticisms about the policies as it relates to Israel by using Donald Trump. As I said, it's the same tactic that Democrats have been using since Donald Trump has been running for president. But here, as I said, I find it to be very callous because, you know, it is a real humanitarian situation that I don't think is really getting the type of attention and the type of urgency that I think it really should be getting from lawmakers and from the political candidates such as Harris, who's running for president. And particularly the issue that Harris is going to run into when it comes to this topic is she's still trying to take a middle position. So, you know, in the past, she's spoken about a temporary ceasefire. And the obvious question is, I mean, when you say it's temporary, do you mean, you know, the bombing should continue after the temporary ceasefire is over? But I mean, she has at least been willing to, you know, use the word ceasefire. So she's spoken about temporary ceasefire. Last month, she made a statement about how she refuses to be silent about the humanitarian situation taking place in Palestine. So, you know, what we see with her is she is making these statements about, you know, condemning certain, you know, humanitarian atrocities in Palestine, condemning the murder of civilians and calling for a ceasefire. But at the same time, she's also expressed a commitment to Israel's security and a commitment to Israel's right to defend itself. Now, obviously, those two things conflict. You know, it's very difficult to sustain a position where you're calling for a ceasefire, but you're also saying Israel does have a right to engage in the type of violence that's engaging in. So that's the type of game that she's going to be playing throughout this election cycle. And her immediate deflection tactic is always going to be, well, if you're raising these criticisms of me, does that mean you want Trump to be elected? So it really is the same game that Democrats have been running. I mean, to be honest, this is not even a new tactic. They've been doing this before Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump really drives a fear in many Americans to the point where it's more effective when it's Trump than it would be if it was any other Republican.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think people have to understand that when she says Israel has a right to defend itself, that means that she will continue to send weapons to Israel, because most of the weapons that Israel has been using, they come from the United States. And I remember correctly, I believe Germany was second after the US. So just keep that in mind. So she is doing that double speak. The other thing too, apparently she did meet with those protesters as well, I think prior to the rally. And they said that they can talk about, like, you know, she's open to ending the arms sales to Israel. But then, and I believe I shared this on a Feeney's post, but then someone who actually works with her publicly stated that, and this was recent earlier today, that she has no plans, no intention to support an arms to end the arms like embargo to Israel at all. So what Kamala Harris is doing is she's trying to make it seem like she's on Israel's side, but she also understands how the Palestinians feel, and she's doing that on purpose, right? So when people say, if anybody says to you that Israel has a right to defend itself, but we need a ceasefire, that's double speak. Because what that means is that government is still going to send the weapons. In order for them to defend themselves, they need the weapons. So the weapons are still going to be sent to Israel, which means that Israel will still continue to kill Palestinian people. People really need to make that connection, and I feel like they're not making that connection. And it's just something that I've noticed. The other thing too, if you guys pay attention to that speech that Kamala gave, even if you mute it and just focus on her nonverbal behavior, you can tell that was planned. You can tell that Kamala had already been coached on how to respond if there were a protest or whatever. She had already planned that, because the way that she does it, the moments when she pauses, it's similar to when she gave that speech on the bridge in Selma, and she was pausing at certain times so that you would get certain sound bites. So remember when she paused and said, we need a ceasefire? And then there was the pause and everyone started clapping. So you didn't really hear her say the part where she said for at least 6 weeks. So this is intentional, the way that she chose to respond. So I want people to understand that. Now, that being said, whether she met with them prior or not, none of that has anything to do with her choosing to hold the threat of Donald Trump over their head when they are protesting against a genocide. So that is a cop-like move. That is something someone who likes to lock people up would do. Look, pay attention to what she just did. Well, look, you can, I'm speaking, you want to continue, you'll get Donald Trump. That's a threat. That's her trying to instill fear into those protesters, because she doesn't want to have to deal with, and anyone that's going into this position is going to have to deal with Israel and what is happening right now to the Palestinian people. And this is the reason why I believe that Obama did not want to come out and endorse her, because Obama knew that she was not up to the task for this. When Obama has been interrupted by protesters, he has never responded the way that she responded. He was never respond. Even Joe Biden didn't respond the way that she did. And in all his senile, whatever was going on with him up there, even he didn't respond the way that she did. But you don't do that. You don't sit up there and hold that over their head when they're complaining about a genocide as if that's not a little thing. This happened in Michigan. That is a swing state. The largest Arab American population lives in Michigan, and I'm pretty sure they heard her very well, considering what I'm seeing on social media, especially those coming from the abandoned Biden campaign. Next up is Chicago for the DNC convention, and I'm here to let everybody know the largest Palestinian American population is in Chicago, and they are already ready. They've already sounded the alarm on social media. So that was not a good idea. Obviously, people will still come out and support her anyway because people have Trump derangement syndrome. But I'm telling you right now, that was not a good idea. And I'm noticing on social media now some of the people that said I was willing to give her, people are saying I was willing to give her a chance because I thought she would be different when it comes to Gaza than Biden. I don't know why people thought that, because if you would have listened to what she was saying when she told you that Israel has a right to defend itself, you saw the money that she's getting from AIPAC. She told you, but how they do so matters. You see what I'm saying? So she never said that she wasn't going to give them weapons. She never said that she wasn't going to support Israel. Every time she spoke about this issue, she made it very clear that she was pro-Israel. People allowed their minds to convince them of what they wanted to hear. And that's where that came from. They wanted to hear that she was going to support the Palestinian people, that she was going to end all of this. But she never said that. And people just weren't paying attention. But now I noticed on social media, they're starting to say, oh, my God, I can't believe this. I thought I was going to give her a chance. And I can't believe it sounds like she's going to be just like Biden. Yes, because everything that she has said is the same thing that Joe Biden was already saying. They just put a different person in the spot to say it, and people absolutely fell for it.
Yeah, Sabs, I want to also chime this in because to connect to your point, it is funny how much people have amnesia, because didn't Kamala Harris say that she was for Medicare for all back in 2020? What happened when they were like, oh, can you clarify your position on Medicare for all? What did Kamala Harris do?
She flipped.
She flipped. She flipped more than an Olympic gymnast. My God, it is how crazy. And the crazy part about it is that she flipped because it was convenient. And the thing is like, you don't think that if she's going to flip on our healthcare, that she's not going to flip on genocide? So this is the thing that I want the people to convey about, to think about, is the fact that somebody like Kamala Harris, she lied, and you don't think she's not going to lie again?
She also flipped on fracking.
For God's sakes.
She also flipped on fracking, everybody, which a lot of people aren't covering this. But it was recently, it came from her campaign. She's now she's not saying that she supports banning fracking. Now she supports fracking. So you see, this person, she's basically a candidate in an empty suit. If you notice, there's no platform on her website still till this day. And that's because Kamala Harris has no plan. The only thing that is in play is her beating Donald Trump. They just want to win. They don't really have a plan to make things better for the American people. And I say this because she could still win. That's the thing. She could still win. And if she does, I don't want to hear people coming to me complaining that she's not doing anything, because it's all right in front of you right now. There's a reason why there wasn't an open primary. Remember, even Barack Obama said he did not want to come out and endorse her. He wanted an open primary. The reason why they did not have an open primary is because, remember, when Kamala ran in 2020, remember, she had to get out of that race because her support decreased so badly after Tulsi Gabbard read her ass about her record. So there's that. So Barack Obama knew that things could be problematic with Kamala Harris. That's why he said, I support an open primary. They decided not to do that because they knew that if they did and they brought other candidates in, they would perform better, particularly in debates, than Kamala Harris would. And then people would point fingers and say, how do you look over the VP? So this is a mess. It's a complete disaster. But the thing is, I'm trying to tell you, they are not being 100% honest here. I have spoken to people in some of these swing states, and I'll tell you right now, especially when it comes to, let's say, Wisconsin. Wisconsin tends to be more conservative than the other states in the Midwest, the other swing states in the Midwest. So don't just assume that everyone in Wisconsin that is definitely going to go to Kamala Harris. Don't assume that. That is the more conservative out of Michigan and Minnesota. There's also issues in Minnesota where if you look at the state, you can see there are small pockets of where it's blue. Most of the state is red. So people have to pay attention to those types of things. This is not to say she still can't win, but what I am saying is if she wins and you don't see any difference from the U.S. giving weapons to Israel and people are still being killed in the Middle East, Palestinians are still being killed, don't come back to me because I told you.
I got a question for you, Sabby and Dwayne. Do you think that the statement that she made in Michigan, do you think that Kamala Harris is going to come out relatively unscathed, or is her goose cooked? Let's start with you, Dwayne.
It would depend on which demographic you're referring to. I think there is probably a large segment of voters who that what's happening in Gaza is not primary concern, so it's not something that'd be an issue with them. But I think definitely where it would be an issue is among voters who were thinking that maybe she'd be a little bit more progressive on this issue than Biden. People who were hoping maybe she'd flip. Maybe she'd take a stronger stance. If you had that hope going into it, I think that would completely dash any illusions about where she stands on that issue. Because the other point I wanted to make as well, and again we've spoken about the American media and the propaganda, is that there's so much focus taking place on what's happening in Gaza that you hardly ever see much coverage about the fact that Israel is still expanding in the West Bank. So that's the whole issue that you never see getting any kind of coverage on the media. And why it's important is because, again, if you're taking the position that Israel has a right to defend itself, then it assumes that Israel is actually the one that is under attack, when the reality is that the Palestinians are still occupied, still losing territory to Israel. And the reality is that anything that they do is actually, essentially, when you say Israel has a right to defend itself, you're reversing the situation and you're not acknowledging the fact that Israel has always been the primary aggressor in this situation. And I think the fact that what's happening in West Bank doesn't get as much media coverage as it should really plays into Harris's ability to flip the situation, to continue to make it look like Israel is just defending itself when actually it's the reverse. That's true.
And this is why it's important for the protesters, when you're protesting, not to just bring up Gaza. You have to bring up the West Bank as well. Kamala Harris hasn't said anything about the expansion in the West Bank. You see what I mean? See, that whole, like he said, that whole Israel has a right to defend itself, that goes away when you bring up the West Bank. So it's important that people mention that. I haven't heard Kamala Harris say anything about the Palestinian detention center, which there's videos all over social media about this, about them sexually assaulting prisoners there. Haven't heard her say one word, but she hosted an event at the White House about the supposed essay on October 7th of Israelis. You see the difference? So this is what I'm trying to tell you. It's all in front of your face. Kamala Harris isn't going to be any different on this issue. She's been given over $5 million from AIPAC alone. Mm-hmm. So they don't give you that type of money for you to side with the Palestinians.
Yeah. In fact, I just want to share this. This is from Red Stream. This soldier, this is a IOF soldier that is actually covering his face because he was one of the soldiers that sexually assaulted a Palestinian, and now he's trying to defend it. So let's go into this.
התחושה שלך מול המערכת, מול צה"ל, מול הפרקליטות?
אני חושב שצה"ל שלנו הוא צבא בריא ביותר.
He said he thinks this army are the healthiest, even though they committed sexual assault.
מפקדים, הלוחמים, אנשי השטח. אם יש מישהו במערכות למעלה שרוצה לקלקל לנו, אני פה להגן על שמנו הטוב. שמחתי מאוד שהימין יודע להתעורר בארץ ישראל. אני לא רוצה להיכנס לימין ושמאל, אבל זה בסוף יוצא ככה, זה לא יעזור כלום, כי הצד הימני הוא זה שקם. עם ישראל יודע להתעורר כשצריך.
I wouldn't show that video, Jaybe.
Okay.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with that one.
Yeah.
But I saw that, yeah.
But the point is that, people like Kamala Harris, she's not speaking out against that. She's not saying, well, what Israel is doing, and the fact that they're debating whether sexual assault of Palestinians is okay or not. That's wild. That's horrible. But yet you don't see her bringing it up.
She hasn't said one word about it at all.
Yeah. So.
And Donald Trump hasn't either.
No.
I mean, they're not saying anything about this. This is why I continue to tell people are like, well, what are we supposed to do? I don't even want to hear it, because before I would say, maybe you didn't have as many options before, but you have multiple people that are running, and people that are right on this issue.
Yes.
Or you don't even have to show up at all. That's the other thing that kills me. People are like, well, I have to. No, you don't.
Yeah. I mean, if you feel like you have to, then leave those names blank and just focus on ballot initiatives.
Yep.
That's what you could do, because ballot initiatives actually directly affect your state and you. So if you want to, all right, just focus on those. Focus on school board, focus on the judges.
Right. And a number of people, and we've been seeing this, Jaybe, but a number of people that were, so-called progressives, or said media people that said don't support candidates that take corporate money. A lot of these people have all gotten on board now. TYT, now it's totally fine. Support Kamala Harris, even though she takes corporate money and she takes money from AIPAC, after they have spent almost a year covering, what AIPAC and Israel has been doing to politicians and to the Palestinian people. They all jumped on board because they're just trying to make money off of the Kamala Harris campaign. You see, so there's a lot of this is just not genuine, and people are just jumping on board because they want to grow and they want to make money, and they don't really care about and I said this before too. A lot of them didn't really care so much about the Palestinian people. They just talked about it because it was a trending, popular thing at that point in time. Now you see a lot of them don't talk about it anymore. Why is that? Because they didn't really care. So everybody pay attention to all the people that called themselves so-called progressives, socialists, said don't support candidates that take corporate money, called out AIPAC, that are all of a sudden now jumping on board the Kamala Harris train. Pay attention to those people.
Yeah, and I want to give the final thoughts about this to you, Dwayne.
Yeah, like I said, just when you really pay attention to what she's doing with her campaign, it's typical politics. It really is doublespeak. It's trying to support Israel, but also make it appear that she's sympathetic towards Palestine and the Palestinian cause, and sympathetic towards the protesters who really want an end to the genocide. But I mean, one of the things that we really haven't discussed as well is in terms of, so we know what type of language she's used, but what are the actual policies? You never hear that from her. So she'll call for temporary ceasefire. She'll make certain statements condemning the genocide, the killing of innocent people, but you never actually get any concrete policies from her in terms of what's actually going to be done. Obviously, one of them would be an arms embargo, and recently her campaign came out and shut that down. So I think not just on this issue, but in American political discourse, it's always important when people are running for office to actually get policy recommendations from these candidates, and not just slogans and the type of phrases that politicians usually engage in when they campaign. We want actual, concrete, tangible policies. What are you going to do to implement change on this particular issue? So that's something that we're not seeing from her campaign as it relates to Israel and Palestine. We're not even in terms of when she says Israel has the right to defend itself. You'll notice there's no follow-up in terms of what does that mean in terms of a policy. So we know what it means, but she'll never actually come out and say what a policy that supports this idea of Israel defending itself looks like. So whenever there's a presidential election, that's always something that's very interesting to me to see on both sides, that these politicians just kind of throw out phrases and concepts and ideas, but there's no concrete policy behind any of the things that they're talking about, because that's part of the doublespeak. When you actually have to make a commitment to policy, then people will really see what it is that Harris is actually planning to do if elected. But she wouldn't do that. So at the moment, you just get those phrases and statements from her, but you're not going to get any actual policy. We already know what that policy is. It's just going to be a continuation of Biden's policy as it relates to Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so very much.
you.
Just to let everybody know, like, what do you have coming up soon? Where can people find you, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so in terms of where they can find me, I'm fairly active on social media, Twitter, which is X now, and Facebook. I try to post there regularly, and also try to be very responsive. So if anyone has any questions, they can reach out and message me, and I will try to respond to that. And as far as what I have coming up, me being a Pan-Africanist, I just tried to keep myself busy because there's so many different international issues taking place impacting African people globally. As we spoke about here, there's issues in the States, in Kenya, in Haiti. So really what I try, my YouTube channel as well. So really that's the work I do. I just try to do what I can to support these different international efforts on the part of African people, because one thing that is encouraging to me is that wherever you find African people globally, whether it be Kenya, Togo, Haiti, even, as I said, there are movements here in the States as well, that we are resisting and we are fighting for change. And I think it's important to really support the people who are doing that work and to help build up platforms who are supporting these efforts. Because as I pointed out, particularly in the United States, the mainstream media is not going to put those voices in front of you. You're not going to see it on CNN or Fox News or those platforms. So I think that's why it's especially important in this day and age to really engage in those type of grassroots efforts, to really support people who are engaged in those grassroots efforts. And that's essentially what I've been doing on an international level, just connecting with people who are doing the grassroots work and seeing what different ways I can support or amplify the work that they're doing. So that's why I really appreciate you having me on and doing this interview. I think this is in line with the type of thing that I'm saying, that those of us who are fighting for these issues and who are really struggling to see these changes need to go about building those connections and building what I always call a united front. I think a united front of different progressive forces is very much needed in this day and age.
All right. Thank you so very much for joining us. Please come back soon so that we can have more conversations like this. I appreciate it.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Sabs. That was a great conversation. Whenever we have guests like this, I always end up learning a lot more. And it feels like I'm in a class. And that's one of the things I deeply appreciate. And shout out to Zoya again for, helping us to get these guests. They're wonderful.
I know Zoya has been doing the damn thing behind the scenes. You guys don't get to see this, but Zoya has been responsible for booking a lot of our guests, and she's just been on fire lately.
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to give first a shout out to all the patrons on Patreon while we have you here. For without you guys, we would not be able to do this type of work. See, with patrons on Patreon, you guys actually make it so that we not only can keep the lights on, but you make it easier for us to be able to get out there and do the damn thing underground. Now, if you guys have noticed on the RBN channel, I recently just had my mutual aid action here in Orlando with the Orlando chapter. Shout out to all the people in the Orlando chapter for helping make it a smashing success. I mean, they really did the work. They did the work out there. And I was just a big mouth to be out there. That's all. And so thank you so much to all of you who also tuned in for that. Also, just to let you guys know, Sabby is actually going to be doing some action in, I think, about 10 days or so. You're going to be doing some action on the ground in Boston. It is going to be for the kids. And I am so excited for that too.
Yeah, the Spot Fund. I can go ahead and I'll pull that up actually, because let me just pull up here.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, I can start on the super chats and the chats. All right. So we're gonna go into the chat really quick. We have What's Left says, it was already a fallout mode. Oh, by the way, take the poll, guys. In fact, let me share that poll really quick before we go into that. And then Sabby will be able to share her action. But this is out of 302 votes. Why did you shrink? Okay, out of 302 votes, it says, did Kamala Harris destroy her campaign with her rebuke of Palestinian protesters? 51% said yes, she nuked it. 20% said no, she'll be fine. and 29% said, not sure, fam. So, yeah. So we got a majority that says she nuked her campaign.
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is to remember is that the Black Boule, and that's those members of the Divine Nine, et cetera, like that usually support the Democratic Party anyway. The Democrat loyalists are going to vote for because they're party loyalists. So they're still going to come out and support anyway. Not to mention there are a number of people that are part of the Black community that are not focused on what's happening in Gaza and are not concerned about that. Right. So there's that too. That's just the reality. They're more concerned about what's happening right here. So there's that. So she'll still get that support from people. I think where she may have difficulty is going to be with younger voters, particularly those that were, pro-Palestinian activists. And then I also think some of the swing voters may be an issue as well. It's going to depend on the state. And I keep telling people, like, the polls show one thing right now. They show her ahead of Donald Trump. She has a little bit of a cushion there. But as we get closer to November, I think it's going to get closer and closer between the two of them, similar to what happened in 2016 with Hillary and Donald Trump. Remember, Hillary was beating him. And as it got closer to November, it became more, tighter of a race. But what you really have to focus on are the swing states. That's just how this works. Like, I hate to say it, but I don't want anyone to think that their state doesn't matter. But the reality is it comes down to those swing states.
Yeah.
That's I could share the barbecue.
Sure.
Yeah. So we are hosting a back to school fundraiser here in Roxbury, in Boston, in the Roxbury neighborhood. That is going to be August 18th at 12 p.m. Eastern at the Bruce C. Balling Municipal Building, the first floor lobby, 2300 Washington Street, Roxbury. And we're giving away school supplies. We're also going to have a barbecue for them there as well. So if you want to support that action, I think where are we now with funding? I think we've raised... Oh, where did it go? Oh, here it is. We've raised $955. The goal was $3,000. I think we don't need $3,000 now because we've already got some of the other supplies. But yeah, so we're doing pretty well with that. I'm just going to go ahead and share the link in the chat too if you want to donate here.
All right. Nice. I am so excited for that, Sabs. That's going to be between what you're doing and also Nick is also doing actually, let me see if I can share that too. Nick is also doing he's also doing a back to school event as well. I should have put this up. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but his back to school event is also coming up. Let me see if I can find it. I know.
I think he tweeted it.
Yeah, I'm just looking for it. Nick tweets a lot, so I gotta find it. But yeah, so he's also doing one. I know he's gotten quite a bit so far for his event, but of course, you always can raise more because this is really for the kids that he's doing. Is also going to be doing haircuts as well. So he's getting together with barbers in the area to give kids haircuts as well so that they can get their haircut before school. And I'll be honest with you, I know exactly what that's like, not being able to have a haircut before school or mom trying to stress out. Here we go. Perfect. Okay. So let me share this really quick and then we'll get to the chats real quick. All right. So chapter event, Kansas. School supplies, clothing, haircuts. If you can attend, then you can give us an email at revolutionaryblackout@outlook.com. If you can donate, is Venmo Revolutionary Blackout. So if you can, just retweet. So I will make sure. Oh, I already did it. So yeah, so that's what's going on right now. This is what Nick is doing for Kansas City. So you have two events that are going on. You have one back to school event in Boston with Sabby and another back to school event that's going on with Nick. So if you guys would like to, you guys can donate to either. So if you guys are on Venmo, just look up Revolutionary Blackout and you guys will find it there. So thank you very much for that. Now, let's go and continue in the chat. I'm going to cover the super chats first because I want to make sure that those are done expeditiously, as Mr. Clark would say. So NK, thank you so much, says, that's exactly the response I expect from a cop when people are exercising their First Amendment right. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. We have Cassie coming in saying, I voted not sure because I'm always shocked by how much people are willing to look past. Yep. We have Ryan says, Kamala only needs to listen to her donors. I say bribers, but same thing. Bush and Bowman lost because they bit the hand that fed them. American voters are sheep led by wolves. All right. Then also this from Jay Tolbert says, Kamala told mega rich donors at the Hamptons fundraiser she didn't think single payer was the way to go. This was after signing into Bernie's Medicare for All bill. After this, it was nothing but lip service. Pitchforks are coming. Thank you very much for they were a member for 17 months. So clap it up for Pitchforks are coming. They say to help the entire planet, hashtag vote green 2024. Thank you very much for that. Pitchforks are coming. Also, we have from Ryan Green says Claudia de la Cruz 2024. These are some of the choices that people have that they're not looking at. They're thinking, oh, Trump and Harris. And it's like, no, like now, however you may feel about him, you still got Cornel West running, right? You have Claudia de la Cruz. You have Dr. Joe Stein, and technically independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So that's what
I mean, I would even say if people really want to scare the Democratic Party into, ending with the Israel-Gaza thing, if you really want to scare the Democratic Party, you have to make the threat to vote third party. Because the thing is that, and I think this is what some people just may not understand. The reality is, they tend to remember you voting for someone else than sitting at home. That's the thing. This is why they still talk about Jill Stein being a part of the 2016 election, and they blame Hillary's loss on Jill Stein. They still remember people voted for Jill Stein. You see what I'm saying? So the way that if you really wanted to put some type of pressure on her, you don't do that by just saying, oh, I'm just gonna, vote for Kamala and we're going to push her left. You're not going to push her left. Stop it with the push left. You didn't push Biden left. You're not going to push anyone left that is owned by the Israeli lobby, period. And people have to get that through their head. So the way that you really implement the pressure is that you cannot support them. This is what people have to understand. So when people say, I'm just going to sit at home, that doesn't do anything for the numbers. I want them to be able to look back on 2024 and say, wow, all these people voted third party. That sends a stronger message.
Thank you, because that's what I've been trying to say. Like, for instance, all those people that voted uncommitted, that said, oh, we're not going to vote for Biden. I'm like, okay, great. You scared them by voting uncommitted. How much of more of a scare is it if you don't reward bad behavior by going third party? You freak them out. You freak them out. And then guess what? If so happens they move to the left, that's the only way you can do it. You stop rewarding bad behavior. Because if you keep voting for them, then guess what they're going to do? They're going to vote for me anyway. I don't have to change anything. That's like, look, if you are a parent and you tell your kid to clean their room, or there'll be consequences, and then they don't clean their room, and you don't give those consequences, or is the room going to get clean? Right? Because the thing is that people are rewarding bad behavior every single time. And,
every time.
And one of my biggest issues is everybody's like, well, we're just throwing our vote away. And I'm like, no, you're not. Because really, to be honest with you, if you vote for Kamala or if you vote for Trump, you are throwing your vote away, because you're throwing your vote away to people who are employed by the oligarchs. That's the issue. And on top of it, once November 6th happens, what's your plan then? That's my question. Because I've been asking people, what's your plan on November 6th? If Kamala Harris wins or if Donald Trump wins, are you going to be organizing? Or are you just going to go back to sleep?
They'll go back to sleep, because this is why I tell people election season, it comes and goes, right? So what are you going to do after election season? This is why organizing is important. You have to organize locally and you have to build dual power. This is why the ballot initiatives are so important. Like, that's going to affect you and impact you directly. So when people say they're just going to stay at home, if you live in a ballot initiative state, that means you're not going to be voting for ballot measures that are going to affect you directly.
Yep.
See what I mean?
I'm sorry. No. Because Sabs, you've been covering ballot initiatives on your channel, which I deeply appreciate. Now I'm covering the Florida ballot initiatives on my channel. We started on ballot initiative amendment number 1. Next week, we're going to be covering amendment number 2. There's only 6 of them, but it's for this election. And so that's why it's so important to know what's going on locally, because that directly affects you too. And the biggest chunk is what we say on RBN. What? Organize. Because if you vote, they expect you to either not vote or vote for one of them. And they don't care either way. Number one, you're damaging them more if you vote third party. If you do vote.
Right. And they will always, that's what I'm telling people. They will always remember that. Here we are. 2016 was what? How many years ago? 8 years ago?
8 years ago.
8? No, wait.
Yeah, 8 years ago.
8 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're still talking about Jill Stein affecting Hillary Clinton.
If they're not
talking about the people that are staying at home. And I'll tell you another thing too that I've been paying attention to. Across the board nationally, the turnout has decreased over the years. And that includes congressional races too. When I covered Cori Bush's loss earlier, I did a recording and I uploaded it. And people are not talking about how the turnout has decreased over the years, whether it's for Cori Bush, whether it's for AOC, whether it's for da-da-da. Because the thing is, like I said, if you don't do something for your people, they will not show up to support you. You take care of your people, you take care of your district, they'll come out and they'll support you. But if you're not doing anything for them, more and more people will check out.
Yep. And another point I forgot, and a lot of people don't bring this up. Look for the third party candidates that are in local and state races. Because the thing is that you'll see Democrat and Republican in every single state. But there are people who may be running for mayor that are running third party. They could be running for city council that may be third party. They could be running for state senate or state representative of third party. You never know. They could be running for comptroller. I think there was a guy that won for comptroller in California under the Green Party. So the thing is, a lot of people are running third party, and they're not just coming out every 4 years. They're actually in there. So you can do that, but then make sure you organize. And that's why we talk about it all the time. So
and that guy won, by the way.
Yeah, he won. Man, so Sabs, so you're taking the night off. So that's going to be good for you. What are you talking about tomorrow?
Tomorrow, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this Kamala story because more information has come out throughout the day. So I'll be covering that on my channel tomorrow. I think there's another foreign policy story I wanted to touch on as well. I don't have all the stories just yet, but that'll be Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And for those who are not aware, Jaybe and I, we're supposed to be on the Jill Stein vice president announcement panel, but that was rescheduled for next Friday. So originally we were going to do that tonight, but they rescheduled it for next Friday. So you'll see us do that next Friday. And no, we don't know who the person is, by the way. People keep asking me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so outside of that, we're about to head on now. It was a great show, wasn't it, Sabs?
Yeah.
All right. So,
California love. Oh, and another thing that's weird too. Don't you think it's weird that nobody seemed to have this type of enthusiasm and when it came to voting for Kamala in 2020, but now all of a sudden people remember, guys, she was selected. Nobody voted for Kamala Harris in a Democrat primary. Nobody voted for her. The DNC just picked her and said, okay, you are the nominee. That's all they did. You didn't vote for her.
Nobody, baby.
One thing will premiere on sorry. One thing that will premiere on my show later on tonight is the Scott Ritter FBI raid. I recorded that as well. So that'll premiere around 7:30, I think, something like that, on my channel tonight.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I did a premiere yesterday with Carl Ja talking about the race and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
All righty.
There's so much news happening this week. It's crazy.
Nobody. Sorry, now it's stuck in my head.
Love you like me. Nobody.
Oh man.
Let me get out of here before I embarrass myself. All right, everybody. Take care. Have yourself a great night. Let me go eat. See you later, Sabs.
See ya.
We love to be you.
Yeah.